July 1996, 9:47 p.m. Century City, Los Angeles. A conference room on the 18th floor is still lit. The air smells faintly of burnt coffee and tension. A VHS tape sits paused inside a bulky monitor. On the screen, a freeze frame of a 22-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio, hair falling across his forehead, mid-smile, half boy, half leading man. Around the table, executives shift in their seats. Titanic is already the most expensive film ever attempted. The budget has ballooned past $100 million. Insurance analysts are uneasy. International distributors are whispering about risk exposure. And now the question hanging in the room isn't about water tanks or special effects. It's about him. He doesn't look like a traditional box office anchor, one executive mutters. The concern isn't talent. DiCaprio had already stunned audiences in What's Eating Gilbert Grape and The Basketball Diaries. Critics respected him, directors admired him. But Titanic isn't an indie character study. It's a global gamble. And global gambles are calculated on spreadsheets, not instincts. You can almost hear the logic stacking up. Overseas markets prefer rugged masculinity, traditional leading men, familiar archetypes, someone older, broader shoulders, a safer silhouette on a poster. DiCaprio to some in that room looks too young, too soft, too unpredictable. And here's the part most people never see: this wasn't a ceremonial casting, it wasn't destiny, it wasn't inevitable. There was a real possibility that Jack Dawson could belong to someone else. Earlier that evening, studio analysts had reviewed test footage, not just chemistry reads with Kate Winslet but data, demographic projections, female teen appeal versus adult male audience retention, international presale modeling. The numbers were unclear. Yes, he had magnetism, but would men show up? Would Europe respond? Would Asia? In blockbuster economics, uncertainty equals danger. And danger at that scale threatens careers, not just actors but executives. Meanwhile, miles away from that room, DiCaprio wasn't campaigning, he wasn't lobbying. In fact, he had reportedly resisted a conventional screen test altogether. He didn't want to audition like he was asking for permission. That decision alone unsettled people. Because in Hollywood, especially at 22, you don't challenge the system. You prove yourself to it. But DiCaprio carried something different even then, a quiet refusal to bend entirely to studio choreography. It wasn't arrogance, it was instinct, a sense that if he played the game too eagerly he would become replaceable. James Cameron saw it. Cameron wasn't looking for a traditional leading man, he was building myth. Jack Dawson wasn't supposed to be a granite statue, he was supposed to feel alive, spontaneous, almost dangerous in his optimism. Cameron believed that unpredictability was the point. But belief doesn't silence accountants. By 10:12 p.m. the conversation had shifted from "is he talented" to "is he bankable?" And that single word, bankable, nearly rewrote modern Hollywood history. You have to understand the timing. The mid-90s were dominated by a specific type of male star: physical dominance, stoic intensity, market-tested charisma. DiCaprio represented a different energy: emotional openness, vulnerability, youth. That wasn't yet proven as a global blockbuster formula. The irony, that vulnerability would later become the template. But in that room on that night, it felt like a risk. Some executives floated alternative names: older actors, broader appeal, safe bets. Because Titanic wasn't just a movie, it was an industry referendum. If it failed, careers would stall. If it succeeded, history would shift. And in moments like that, studios leaned toward safety. Cameron pushed back hard. He argued that audiences didn't want a conventional hero, they wanted someone they could fall in love with instantly, someone who didn't feel manufactured. He reportedly insisted, if not Leo, then the film loses its heartbeat. That kind of insistence is rare, it's expensive. And it almost didn't win. Because here, what people forget: studios don't just cast actors, they insure them, they forecast them, they model their faces against foreign box office curves. DiCaprio's curve didn't yet exist. By 11:03 p.m. the tape was played again. This time quieter. No spreadsheets, no projections. Just chemistry. Jack teaching Rose to spit off the side of the ship. That mischievous grin, that sense that he wasn't trying to impress, he was simply being. Something shifted in the room. Not because of logic. Because of feeling. But even then, the approval wasn't triumphant. It was cautious. Conditional. And when the meeting ended just before midnight, the decision was leaning in his favor, but it wasn't sealed in celebration. It was sealed in risk. And risk has consequences. Because what no one in that room predicted was what would happen next. The hysteria, the global frenzy, the suffocating fame. The kind of visibility that doesn't just elevate a career, it traps it. And within 2 years, the young actor who almost didn't get Titanic would do something even more unexpected. He would step back. At the peak. Why? December 19th, 1997, Westwood Village, Los Angeles premiere night. Searchlights cut through the winter sky, barricades tremble as crowds surge forward screaming a single name in waves. Leo Leo. Flashbulbs explode in blinding bursts. Security locks arms tighter. Somewhere behind tinted glass, Leonardo DiCaprio sits in the back of a black sedan, staring out at something that looks less like celebration and more like detonation. You can almost feel the vibration of it, not applause, hysteria. Titanic doesn't just open, it erupts. Within weeks, it becomes a global phenomenon, not just a box office success, a cultural takeover. Teen magazines print his face on glossy covers, talk shows dissect his smile, overseas markets that executives once doubted now overflow with demand. The very risk that made studios nervous becomes the film's gravitational center. But here's the paradox no spreadsheet predicted. The same vulnerability that made Jack Dawson magnetic makes DiCaprio intensely exposed. Fame at that scale isn't linear, it's tidal. Every airport becomes chaos, every restaurant becomes a spectacle, paparazzi escalate, headlines inflate. He's no longer just an actor, he's a symbol, a fixation. And symbols aren't allowed to evolve quietly. Inside Hollywood, something shifts too. Offers flood in, romantic leads, studio blockbusters, repetitions of Jack Dawson with different costumes. The industry predictably wants to replicate the formula. This is where most careers lock into orbit. Visibility equals power, momentum equals leverage, stay present, stay hot, stay everywhere. But psychologically, something else was happening. DiCaprio had experienced the machine from the inside. He'd seen how quickly the same executives who doubted him now recalibrated around him. He felt how fame could distort perception, how the industry's affection could feel conditional. Because here's the unspoken truth, Hollywood doesn't reward presence, it rewards performance of presence. Be seen, be available, be promotable. And at 23, he was the most promotable face in the world. Yet instead of accelerating, he slowed. Not publicly, not dramatically, but strategically. After Titanic, he didn't sign 3 interchangeable blockbusters. He didn't chase immediate commercial repeats. He gravitated toward directors with distinct visions, Danny Boyle, Martin Scorsese. He chose the beach, he chose darker material, psychological complexity over safe romantic heroism. Why? Because being overexposed at the wrong moment can fossilize you. Hollywood history is full of actors who peaked too brightly and burned into typecasting. DiCaprio saw the pattern, and restraint became power. There's a psychological concept at play here: scarcity increases value, absence creates intrigue. When you're not constantly visible, the industry can't fully define you. After Titanic, he could have become permanently the boy on the bow. Instead, he recalibrated. The early 2000s weren't about dominating box office charts every summer. They were about repositioning identity, working with Scorsese on Gangs of New York, transforming from teen idol to serious actor. But that transformation required risk. Because stepping away from what the public wants can feel like betrayal. Fans expected romance, studios expected replication. He offered intensity. That choice wasn't universally celebrated at first. The beach received mixed reactions, some questioned whether he was drifting from commercial instincts. But here's what the industry quietly noticed. He wasn't chasing approval. He was protecting longevity. And that's a rare instinct at 24. You can almost sense the internal tension, the awareness that constant visibility could dilute authority. That overexposure could reduce him to nostalgia before 30. So instead of riding the wave blindly, he studied it. Worked selectively, collaborated deeply, built relationships with directors who valued craft over immediacy. And over time, something subtle happened. The narrative shifted from heartthrob to serious actor. Not because of one performance. Because of packing. This is the part Hollywood doesn't advertise. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't expansion, it's restraint. By the mid-2000s, DiCaprio wasn't everywhere. And that absence created something unusual. Anticipation. Each release felt intentional, each role felt curated. His brand transitioned from celebrity to craftsman. Studios began recalibrating differently. He wasn't just bankable. He was dependable. And dependable actors, the ones who can open films without oversaturating themselves, reshape industry economics. It started with Titanic nearly slipping away. It evolved into something bigger, control. But here's the deeper layer. DiCaprio wasn't the only one who discovered that stepping back could amplify power. In fact, across Hollywood history, some of the most influential figures have done the same thing, not because they failed, but because they refused to be consumed. And when they pulled away, the industry didn't replace them. It waited. Why does absence make Hollywood nervous? And what happens when stars realize they don't need constant visibility to remain dominant? September 5, 2014, Telluride Film Festival, late afternoon. A small crowd gathers outside a mountain theater. There are no screaming barricades this time, no hysteria, just anticipation. Inside, a film called Birdman is about to premiere, and at its center is an actor many once believed Hollywood had quietly moved past, Michael Keaton. For years, Keaton had stepped away from the spotlight. After the early dominance of Batman and a string of 90s hits, he didn't vanish in scandal. He didn't collapse publicly. He simply slowed down. He turned down roles that felt repetitive, chose projects that didn't scream visibility, lived outside the constant churn of premieres and press tour. At the time, some industry watchers interpreted it as decline, a fading chapter. But here's what they misunderstood. He was protecting authorship over his image. By the time Birdman premiered, the narrative wasn't comeback, it was reinvention. And that's the distinction. The same pattern had quietly unfolded with DiCaprio, just in a different tempo. After Inception and The Wolf of Wall Street, he paused again. 4 years passed before The Revenant, then more selective spacing. In an industry addicted to momentum, 4 years feels like silence. But silence builds gravity. Psychologically, stepping back disrupts Hollywood's consumption cycle. The system expects stars to feed it continuously: new content, new headlines, new presence. When someone refuses that rhythm, the machine doesn't know how to categorize them. So it waits. And waiting generates mystique. You can almost see it in marketing meetings. When was his last film? It's been a while. That's good. It feels like an event. An event. That's what absence creates. And events are profitable. Look at Daniel Day-Lewis, famously selective, years between performances, every return treated as cinematic ceremony. Or consider Adele in music, long breaks that transform albums into cultural resets. The psychology is universal. Scarcity signals confidence. It tells the industry, I don't need constant validation. That energy shifts negotiation power. When DiCaprio appears on a call sheet now, it doesn't feel routine, it feels deliberate. Studios don't question his bankability anymore, they court his timing. That's a different kind of leverage. But it didn't begin with dominance. It began with risk. The night Titanic nearly slipped away when executives questioned whether he could carry a global film. From that fragile starting point, he learned something crucial. Approval is temporary, positioning is permanent. And positioning requires discipline. There's also a psychological toll to constant exposure that few acknowledge publicly. When identity becomes tied to public reaction, decision-making shifts. actors start choosing roles based on noise rather than instinct. By stepping back periodically, figures like DiCaprio reclaim internal calibration. They reset their compass. You can almost imagine the internal dialogue. If I'm everywhere, what am I actually saying? Hollywood rewards noise, but legacy rewards intention. And legacy is slower. When The Revenant finally arrived in 2015, it wasn't just another role, it was a transformation narrative, brutal, physical, enduring. The Oscar win that followed felt less like a campaign victory and more like inevitability. Because audiences hadn't been saturated with him, they were ready. That readiness is strategic. And here's the twist: when powerful figures pause, the industry recalibrates around them. Scripts are held, directors wait for availability, release schedules adjust. Absence doesn't diminish influence. It tests it. If you disappear and no one waits, that's irrelevance. But if you disappear and the system pauses with you, that's power. The night executives doubted DiCaprio's bankability, they feared uncertainty. Decades later, his uncertainty is what makes him valuable. Unpredictable choices, infrequent appearances, controlled visibility. Hollywood didn't just accept that strategy. It adapted to it. But there's one final layer to this story, one that extends beyond individual careers. Because when major figures slow down intentionally, it forces the industry to confront a deeper question. What happens when stars stop playing the visibility game altogether? January 2016, Beverly Hills, awards season at full throttle. Ballrooms glow gold under chandelier light, campaign strategists move like quiet generals, publicists coordinate interviews down to the minute. Every nominee is expected to be visible, grateful, present. Leonardo DiCaprio stands backstage, moments before accepting the Academy Award for The Revenant. The applause is thunderous, the narrative is complete, the long wait, the physical endurance, the validation. But look closely at his posture. There's no desperation in it. No relief that feels frantic. Because by this point, the Oscar isn't rescuing his career. It's affirming a trajectory he already controlled. And that control came from something Hollywood rarely anticipates: refusal. Refusal to oversaturate. Refusal to chase every headline. Refusal to be constantly available. In an industry engineered around urgency, saying "not yet" is radical. After the Oscar, something subtle happens again. He slows, fewer films, longer gaps. When he appears in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019, it feels curated, intentional, even playful. Not reactive. You can almost sense the industry's new posture around him: deference. Directors approach him knowing he might say no. Studios build timelines around his rhythm. The power dynamic has shifted completely from that 1996 conference room. And this is the larger pattern. When major figures pause strategically, they don't just protect their mental space, they redefine market psychology. Hollywood thrives on predictability: release calendars, franchise cycles, quarterly returns. But stars who disrupt that rhythm create a new kind of event economy. Scarcity becomes the brand. Look beyond DiCaprio. Rihanna stepped away from music at her commercial peak, redirecting energy into business. The absence didn't erode relevance, it expanded it. Cameron Diaz stepped back entirely. No scandal, no implosion, just distance, and with distance came control over narrative. Even directors, Quentin Tarantino limiting his filmography deliberately, Christopher Nolan spacing projects with precision. Restraint communicates something powerful. I am not dependent on the machine. Psychologically, that shifts how audiences perceive you. Constant visibility can signal hunger, selective visibility signals confidence. And confidence attracts patience. But here's the deeper layer. When stars refuse constant exposure, they also protect creative evolution. They aren't reacting to box office data in real time, they're building arcs. DiCaprio's career post-Titanic isn't defined by frequency. It's defined by progression, from romantic lead to psychological intensity, from ensemble charisma to auteur collaborator. That evolution required breathing room. Imagine if he had accepted every romantic blockbuster offer in 1998. The industry would have typecast him. Audiences would have fatigued. Instead, by stepping back, by choosing projects with space in between, he allowed perception to mature. And perception in Hollywood is everything. The irony circles back to that July night in 1996. Executives feared he wasn't bankable enough, too uncertain, too different from the established mold. What they couldn't foresee was that uncertainty would become his greatest asset. Because unpredictable stars are harder to commodify, harder to replace, and harder to ignore. By the time modern streaming culture accelerated content consumption, DiCaprio was already operating on a different tempo. While others scrambled to maintain visibility in a 24/7 cycle, he maintained scarcity. In a world of constant noise, silence became strategic. And here's the question that lingers. Is Hollywood slowly learning that power isn't about dominance, it's about control over your own rhythm? Because every time a major figure steps back intentionally and returns stronger, the industry absorbs the lesson. Availability is optional. Authority is earned. The night Titanic nearly slipped away could have reshaped his destiny. Instead, it became the first reminder that nothing in Hollywood is guaranteed, not approval, not momentum, not loyalty. So you build something deeper than hype. You build packing. And packing over decades becomes legacy.